Good evening. This is Maestro Cretella with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite Modcast. Today, we have a 1v1 on Fedrid Folly. Our first player is Phoenix. Phoenix, the bird that rises from the ashes. He is playing as the orc Mekboy. He's a little orc with a screw in his mouth, or at least that's how he looks if you don't have all of his new elite bling where he gets that special helmet. He is a little teleporting orc. He repairs. He has a ranged weapon, starts out with that little shooter, can get a bigger shooter, or you can even get some setup weapons with him, both a beamy def gun as well as a def gun. So, being a teleporting hero, he can definitely control the map a lot, harass, decap points, bleed models off of infantry squads and such. His opponent is none other than Maestro Cretella, playing as the Eldar Warlock. The Eldar Warlock is a melee hero for the Eldar. He can do more spell casting, offensive or support, or you can make him a pure melee tank. Either way, he gets that versatility, and he can be a pretty powerful hero. So I'm really starting to get into the 1v1 groove again, both in terms of casting as well as even in terms of playing, which is actually, it's quite a change for me. I really got into the elite grind of constantly playing team games. Definitely, the elite community is definitely a very team game community. And 1v1, there's definitely, it's like the 1v1 community is a small subset of the elite community, which is itself already pretty small. But at any rate, I'm playing as the Warlock right here, and I remember like when I started bringing my Warlock out again, people were like, "Oh, I've never seen you play anything else but Chaos," and it's interesting because I originally started out as a Space Marine player, playing as the Apothecary, and that's how I learned the game. Then I started picking up the Sorcerer, then the Warlock. I had an IG phase at one point. And there was a time when I wasn't really into Eldar anymore, but lately I've actually really been settling into the Warlock as probably my second best hero. I enjoy him quite a bit. Certainly, there are still some things that... Certainly, my Warlock doesn't feel quite as good as my Sorcerer. One big thing is that I feel like... I mean, my fundamentals are I'd say are probably pretty sound. My knowledge of the units, their abilities also, I definitely have that. But I'd say a big difference between my Sorcerer and my Warlock is I definitely don't have the kind of matchup knowledge or just comfort with fighting all of the different races with Eldar as I do with the Warlock. I mean, as I do with the Sorcerer. In particular, I'd say Orcs are probably a matchup with Eldar that is still a little bit rough for me. I played several games with Phoenix, and I think in one of the games I played for this one, if not the game I immediately played for this one, I lost the game, and I tried a build of 2 Dire Avengers, a squad of Banshees, and a Ranger. And what I found out about that was that I really had a lot of trouble holding ground against double shooter boys and sluggers, pretty much. So in this case, I've actually gone for a double shuriken build. So this is actually a pretty classical Eldar play, getting double shurikens. Part of what you do is you cover the firing arc of one shuriken with the firing arc of the other shuriken. It's overlapping suppression arcs, it's known as. And you can do this with any race that has suppression teams, but it has always been most commonly an Eldar tactic. For whatever reason, the Eldar setup team is arguably the best. It definitely has some of the best properties. It is the most powerful setup team in terms of the damage it does. And it also moves slightly faster, speed 5.5 as opposed to 5. And although I'm not positive on this, I believe it has some combination of either faster setup or teardown times. So I'm working with that double shuriken play, and hopefully this will allow me to kind of control the orcs better than I did in the previous game where I did not have any shuriken weapons, shuriken cannons at all. Now, obviously, the Mekboy is himself an answer, kind of like a free setup team counter, simply because he can teleport. He's not going to be the most powerful setup team counter because the way he would counter a setup team is that he would teleport behind it and then tie it up in melee. He doesn't do a whole lot of melee damage, but sometimes just having him teleport in and tie things up is enough to win an engagement because that means the rest of the army gets to move forward, do their damage, especially with orcs, where you really only need to tie up the suppression team for just a little bit before the shooter boys come rolling in behind and just DPS down whatever unit they want when they get to be unopposed. And I think that was a big struggle I had in the previous game when I did not have a Shuriken Cannon. The shooter boys were just overpowering the Dire Avengers, overpowering the Rangers, controlling Banshees. And they are, of course, the shooter boys are just, of course, one of the greatest assets. Well, maybe not one of the greatest, but definitely, yeah, you know, it probably is one of the greatest assets that orcs have, because it's something that's so good and so powerful in Tier 1, and it really scales. It continues to scale later on into the game. All right, so right here, I actually positioned my Banshees right next to the Shuriken Cannon. That allowed them to intercept the Mekboy and counter-initiate against the Mekboy, who had tied up the Shuriken Cannon. And I was actually able to use that, kind of distract a little bit, reset up the Guardian Weapon Team, tried to go to tie it up again, actually misteleported right into the firing arc and ended up losing his Mekboy. So normally the Mech by himself would definitely counter a single Guardian Weapon Team. Of course, part of the reason you get two is to counter the counters to a single one. So this is actually like the build that I'm going with now is like a very, very classical Eldar build, at least in the span of Retribution. It was definitely a very classical retail Retribution build, getting Dire Avengers, Banshees into double Guardian Weapons teams. And I've actually very rarely gotten this build. And part of the reason I've very rarely gotten this build is because I've really favored either double Dire Avenger builds or Ranger builds. And generally, either one of those means you're subtracting a Shuriken Cannon from your build. Even if you get one, you're probably not going to get two. Ooh, and there we had some infiltrated Luda boys. I just sent my Warlock over there thinking that he would be able to just capture unopposed, but little did I know that there were some Ludas right in front of there. I think I got pretty lucky and also just had some good awareness to realize, oh, my Warlock's getting shot, and got him out of there, even though he was like point blank in front of a setup team. And setup teams do, of course, do a whole lot more damage the closer you get to them. That's how he had lost his Mekboy before, when he had teleported right in front of the Guardian Weapon Team. And the Guardian Weapon Team, as the suppression team that already does the most damage, is naturally going to be the one that's the most dangerous to walk right in front of. So actually, a triple cap for Phoenix. He's got a significant VP lead. I've got a bit of a tech lead with both more resources in the bank, went to Tier 2 faster, and I think I've had the better end of power bashes. Phoenix had an early power bash, but I think I bashed more generators total, in part because I've just been running my Banshees over here to get power bashes, and I like that, just running the Banshees to bash power, especially if I have the rest of my units engaging somewhere else, because then I know that I'm probably going to be distracting much of his army, much of the things that he would need to intercept and force off my Banshees from the power farm. The Banshees bash pretty quickly for a non-flamer unit. I think they do it. I think they're faster at bashing than the other Tier 1 melee units. And it also gets them levels, it gets them experience, which of course eventually leads to levels. And Banshees are definitely a unit that you want to keep alive, and you want them to level. They're pretty good at leveling, but the sooner they level, the better. So I like to give them that extra experience from bashing the generators. Now, I've also gotten a squad of Warp Spiders, and I'm more and more finding, like, it's... Certainly, in this particular matchup against Orcs, I'm really finding it hard to find a reason not to get Warp Spiders, because they just are so good in that sense. And I mean, they're a great unit overall, but I find them slightly tougher to use and somewhat riskier in some other matchups. Namely, Space Marine and Chaos are two matchups where I find that going for Warp Spiders isn't as much of... It doesn't seem to be quite as good of a purchase as it is in this matchup. But just you get this unit, Warp Spiders, certainly any single Shooter Boy squad. Normally, one of the great advantage of Orcs is that they have that Tier 1 range dominance of the double Shooter Boys. The Warp Spiders really gives me something to compete and arguably overpower the Shooter Boys. Since the Warp Spiders do a huge amount of damage, Very good at bleeding Shooto Boy models. They are a bit tougher, although I still have to be a little careful with the fact that I'm facing down double Shooto Boys with one squad of Warp Spiders. So part of what I'm always trying to do is engage the Shooto Boys by having my Warp Spiders teleport directly into cover. Because I don't want the Warp Spiders out of cover, because then they will bleed models unnecessarily. And then there's also, of course, the fact that the Warp Spiders also get the Haywire Grenade, so I've often stated very theoretically that I think Warp Spiders are a great purchase in general in any matchup. If you're not sure what to get in Tier 2 as Eldar, that Warp Spiders can generally be a safe purchase because they perform very effectively as an anti-infantry unit, and also because you have that Haywire Grenade, which is great at stalling vehicles or just using as a snare, since it's the only vehicle snare that Eldar have outside of the Eldritch Storm, which is of course not as practical. And I think that's particularly good in this matchup for dealing with some of the potential vehicle rushes, and I mean that in the form of the Death Dread is a big issue, because especially if you don't get a snare, the Death Dread can really be a big pain in the ass when it charges using that Death Dread charge and just straight up just ties up your Bright Lance. Now, right now I don't have a Death Dread to deal with. Phoenix actually got a Weird Boy, which, you know, it's strangely, the Weird Boy is a purchase that I feel like I haven't even been seeing that much lately, even though everybody knows how incredibly good the Weird Boy is. And he really is not bad. The Death Dread is certainly a very strong purchase in Tier 2 for Eldar, for Orcs, and I think particularly in 1v1, where if you can get that Death Dread out early, bash power early, that can sometimes be the game for you, whether sooner or later, just because of the power advantage you secure. Ooh, that positioning of the Banshees running right into that hidden Luda arc really surprised me right there. Since I was just trying to run away from the Slugger Boys, I've really bashed a lot of generators. I think I've bashed like at least 5 generators with my Slugger Boys, with my Banshees in this case. And of course, one of the great things about Warp Spiders is the mobility that you get from them being a teleporting unit. And they're just such a great unit in that sense. And of course, just part of what I do is I had them teleport around. I saw that the Mekboy was going for a decap on one of my VPs, and that makes the Warp Spiders very, very good for intercepting things. So it can help with map control because it's good at disrupting your opponent's map control. And one of the great things about a Guardian Weapon team or any suppression team is that you can also use it to cover a victory point. Certainly better than, I think better than just non-setup teams, because if a setup team, or a suppression team rather, is going to control any infantry squad, it's going to control them. And that can be enough to deal with just about any infantry unit that tries to go for a point. As opposed to, if you're using some kind of non-suppression team to guard a point, you're really relying on that setup, on whatever that unit is, to be able to overpower or overtake whatever unit your opponent sends. And I think that there could be a lot more variability to that. Really, if you have a Guardian, a Shuriken Cannon, or any suppression team guarding a point, the only thing that's really going to be able to deal with it, if it just like tries to wander over and cap, is a jump unit. And normally, I don't think you have your jump units wander around the map for map control purposes, because they're usually very important for winning engagements. So, in that sense, suppression team is pretty good for guarding a point, so I'm kind of locking down this area. Phoenix doesn't have any Storm Boys, and his best bet otherwise would actually be to send the Weird Boy over, but that's again another unit who would be very crucial for winning engagement, so he's probably not going to send him either. Banshees are running in, and they suppress a bunch of things, now going for the Slugger Boys. And I was wondering what I was going to do there. I thought maybe I would have them go directly for the Weird Boy to threaten the Weird Boy. And I thought they were going to get hit by the Warp Vomit much earlier than that, but then he didn't. I don't know why I teleported the Warp Spiders quite directly into there, and that ends up being an extremely close call for me. Nearly losing that squad of Warp Spiders. May have even gotten lucky with him disrupting his own Slugger Boys. And I've got some upgrades on the Warlock. We've already seen them a bit. I've got the Merciless Witchblade as well as the Warp Throw. Now, the Merciless Witchblade might seem curious because how am I going to get into melee? Wouldn't I be better off with like a spell or something? but I think part of my intention there is that the Merciless Witch, I got it pretty much for the ranged attack on the Merciless Witchblade, which does weapon knockback. So that's a good answer to the Mekboy, which I haven't even been using that against the Mekboy, but it's potentially a good answer against him. But I think I more got it because of the Weird Boy. The Weird Boy, I think, can be very threatening. And now he's got 2 single entities. So, and the Merciless Witchblade, because of that knockback on its ranged attack, is a fantastic single entity counter. That being said, despite the fact that I got that, I'm now making a very quick weapon switch to the Immolator Blade because Phoenix put down this turret. And I actually think that turret may not have been such a great idea, in part because I don't know, he did it. He's trying to use the advantages of the Mekboy and try to lock down the points himself, but the Immolator Blade is actually one of the best counters to these defensive buildings. And he may have just like kind of forgotten that or didn't really think of it, because very few heroes have an answer to defensive buildings like the Immolator Blade for the Warlock, and especially because the Immolator Blade is also a relatively situational purchase that you don't see very often. It's not really his best weapon choice, but in this particular situation, this is exactly the situation where the Immolator Blade would work out very well. Actually, Mike gonna take out the Weird Boy right here. One more hit should do it. Also got some range fire from the Warp Spiders, who nearly died trying to finish off that Weird Boy, but I do manage to finish him off, in part because I got that Warp Throw that just brought the Weird Boy in a little bit more, and put him in a pretty bad position where my Warlock did a lot of damage. And I don't know if you noticed, and I didn't point it out right at the time, but he was taking out huge chunks of the Weird Boy's health out with that Immolator Blade, and just getting any weapon upgrade with the Warlock is going to help out. Even though the stats seem to be fairly low, they still work out very well. I think in the case of the Immolator Blade, the upfront damage is pretty good, but it also does some damage over time, much like the Sorcerer's Sword of Flame. It actually does more damage overall than the Sorcerer's Sword of Flame, so the damage ends up being pretty good, even though it doesn't appear to have the stats of many other melee heroes like the War Boss or the Force Commander. But of course I'm getting a whole lot more versatility out of the Warlock than I would out of a hero like the Force Commander or the War Boss. Now I have my Guardian weapon team trying to guard this point, but apparently he actually managed to just tank the suppression anyway. He's now losing models on his Slugga Boys. He actually appeared to lose the knob, which I didn't think you could lose the Slugga knob. I thought he had a knob there. But either way, he's dead. Oh, and now we have a Death Dread, a Tier 3 Death Dread, which actually seems really, really strange, because he had already gone to Tier 3, and he got a Death Dread of all things. That's a really curious purchase. But he did successfully use it to flank the units that I had guarding that point. It also forced a change on one of my Guardian weapons teams onto a Bright Lance. He's going for the Generator Bash, but I already have the Bright Lance up well into Tier 3 for both of us, so I've got my Bright Lance. And it's still curious, this Death Dread purchase, because of course the main reason to get a Death Dread is when you get to Tier 2 early as Orcs and you're using it as a rushable vehicle, you're going to go for a bash on the power and secure an economic advantage for even further. And he was starting to bash generators, but it was already well into Tier 3. So, he wasn't exactly going to... he wasn't exactly going to have the Death Dread be unopposed. Anyway, setting the Bright Lance up again, trying to do in combination with that Warp Spider Haywire Grenade. That being said, the Slugga Boys are charging in, and they will get into the Bright Lance. Ooh, only one more hit on that Death Dread would have finished it off, and when I say one more hit, I mean one more hit, and that's considering the Bright Lance does not actually do that much damage per hit. It fires very quickly and it fires repeatedly and very quickly. But the individual shots on the Bright Lance are not as powerful as the individual shots on basically just on the other setup AV weapons. It does about 80 damage per shot to vehicles. Whereas most of the other setup AV weapons are doing more in the mid-hundreds range. And I've now got a Fire Prism out on the field, but Phoenix isn't exactly behind in tech. He's actually pretty much kept pace. May have been slightly behind. I think he got to the tiers slower than I did. Certainly got to tier 2 before tier 2 after I did, rather. And I think he got to tier 3 after I did as well. But he still made it there. So he still managed to just stay there, stay in the game as far as his resources go. And he's even got a looted tank building after he had gotten a tier 3 Death Dread. I've got a Fire Prism. I've definitely got plenty of AV, but he's also getting a lot of vehicles. That being said, I think one of the things that's going to be really challenging about what Phoenix is doing in terms of vehicles is that he's only got one squad of Sluggo Boys. And of course, the double shooter build is very common. It's very easy. It scales very well. I've been told double Sluggo builds are actually very good as well. And definitely one of the advantages of double Sluggo builds is that you are better at supporting vehicles. And this double vehicle play is going to be a lot harder to support. And part of what could happen is he may not generally have 2 vehicles in play at once. And even if he can manage to have 2 vehicles in play, usually if I manage to damage them, they'll be off the field for quite a while, because if both of them get damaged, that's a lot of repair time for one squad. And that also minimizes the effect of the Sluggo Boys as well. So that's just a lot to consider in terms of if you want to go for a vehicle play, or if you want to get an early, if your tier 1 build includes only 1 repair unit, just how you're going to deal with that basically, and just what the consequences and effects are. Meanwhile, my Fire Prism, I had to get a new squad of Dire Avengers because I lost my original squad. I didn't see it, but I lost my squad of Dire Avengers. And I definitely need that to support the repairs on a Fire Prism, which is not a very tough unit. Certainly, close up, the looted tank would overpower the Fire Prism. And here we have an absolutely horrendous Eldritch Storm. And so far, the only times I've cast games of me using the Eldritch Storm, it's been me completely squandering them, and I really hit nothing there. It was really just a desperation move to try to get rid of this vehicle quickly, and I had haywired the vehicle, hoping that I could combine the haywire with the Eldritch, but I tried to read that he would keep moving backwards, and he didn't. Instead, he kept moving forwards, and that resulted in, since the haywire doesn't completely immobilize vehicles, it only snares them a little bit. I don't remember whether it's 50 or 60%, but either way, he could still move that looted tank. And I ended up using 500 red and achieving absolutely nothing. Now, VPs are in favor of Phoenix. He's had a VP lead. We were even for a while, but then he had a VP lead of about 250 to about 90. And I think the looted tank here, positioned by these 2 VPs, is pretty good. It can be a very good defensive unit, and you only get the choice of the looted tank. You don't get the choice of upgrading the cannon to something else. Ooh, and you know, over here, I think I may have missed myself taking out the Death Dread. But you don't get the choice of changing the looted tank's cannon to a las cannon or a vanquisher, which in some ways is a good thing, because it means you get to keep the regular battle cannon, or just whatever the cannon on the looted tank is called, which is actually extremely versatile. And I mean, the default cannons on most of the tanks, like the regular Predator, the regular Lehman Russ, is actually very versatile because it's both an AV cannon as well as being very, very good against infantry. I mean, one shot from this against the Banshees, I don't know if you saw, but it took out like 40% of the squad's health. Maybe not 40, maybe more like 30, but that's still big. I mean, as opposed to if you get those dedicated AV weapons for the tanks, they tend to lose a lot of their anti-infantry effectiveness. Anyway, the tank is now not in such a good position, partially path blocked by the shooter boys. I tried to have Banshees go in for supplemental AV, but now the looted tank is in quite a bit of trouble, about to get haywired and potentially finished off by a Bright Lance shot, and that in fact does it. So, the looted tank goes down. We have a Rocks about to go in on some stuff. However, I managed to pay attention and just get pretty much didn't get hit at all. In fact, I think he lost more models from that Rocks than I did. So we've seen 2 Rocks that were almost completely wasted. And I mean, that was also very good. Well, very good on both of our parts, because we both used nukes to try to take out a tank, which in a way is already slightly overkill. And in both cases, we managed to micro out of each other's nukes. And I mean, that Rocks definitely could have killed my Fire Prism very easily if I had not reacted soon enough. That could have been the end of my Fire Prism. Phoenix actually has the double cap again, so he's ticking down VPs while I'm still on the back foot. And one of the strategies you can definitely do on this map is in the late game, basically just locking down this left side because 2 VPs are there. Now I've gone for locking down the right side, but there's only 1 VP there, so even if I hold that 1 VP, I'm not going to win the game because I need to get at least one of these. So he's kind of putting the pressure on me to assault this side because he's holding this side. I chose to hold the top, he chose to hold the, I chose to hold the right, he chose to hold the left. Now over here, I had my Banshees come in from the side. They actually went for the Luda squad, and it's good that they did that because that allows my Fire Prism to move forward. My Fire Prism has 249 out of 500 hit points. That means the first shot from that Luda did over 250 damage to the Fire Prism. So only 2 shots would take out that Fire Prism. So I had to be really, really careful there, and I just made sure to tie up that Beamy Luda with my Fire Prism, or rather tied up that Beamy Luda with my Banshees so that the Fire Prism could actually do stuff. That actually cleared the way for my Warlock to capture the point, although we now have Phoenix being very persistent as far as now that he's losing the left side, trying to take the right side. He's actually got an upgrade on the Mekboy, the custom force field, and we see that he's actually using that as a way of helping him tie up the Guardian weapon team. He's knocking it over, but now that it's worn off, look at how little damage the Mekboy is doing. And now I also had my War Spiders over here to intercept again. They're just so great for intercepting, and they end up being pretty good at killing things on retreat just because they do a huge amount of range damage, especially when they're level 3. So now I managed to have the double cap, actually about to get the triple cap, which is a pretty good situation for me. It's going to help me come back in the VPs, and it's going to be more or less even. And he really needs to make something happen at this point now that I'm about to get the triple cap. I may not actually get the triple cap. His shooter boys could definitely come and scare off my Warlock. I've got about halfway to go. Here's a warp throw, and actually just move them out of there. Warlock, meanwhile, took a lot of damage in that, but he doesn't get finished off. And I've still got the Warp Spiders guarding this side point over here, even though... and if I need them to switch, they can always just teleport across onto the cliff, and then they should be able to come over here. I could potentially use swift movement to get them over here faster. But, I mean, as it is, I can actually still rest a little bit. Because I've got 2 VPs, and he's just trying to get 1 back. Banshees are forced off the field, however, after taking some cannon shots. But here's an Autarch to tie up all these squads that are over here. And it seems like I missed a lot of stuff, and I actually do move in the Warp Spiders. Managed to, nearly losing the Autarch, but I do manage to get off a Haywire. And wow, the Autarch came very, very close to the... This is not how you should use a Fire Prism, but I still have the advantage. I'm actually trying to tie up the Ludas with the Warp Spiders so that they can't shoot. And I've got the Bright Lance over here, and that should be enough to finish off this looted tank. Still taking Bright Lance shots, and 1 more actually takes it down. VP's even at 54 to 54, in fact, with Phoenix retreating off the field. Should actually be pretty bad news for him. Now, really ticking down in my favor, and I'm going to move my Warlock over here to try to decap this point and finish the game. Phoenix asking about Warp Throw, no cooldown. As he said that, I kind of checked. Cooldown is 60 seconds, so you can use it once a minute. And I've really been using the Warp Throw. I haven't been using it that much to set up damaging combinations. I did one time where I used the Warp Throw and then my Banshees were right there to follow up. But I've been using it more as VP denial, as just either throwing units off the points or just getting them away. Although part of that is that I'm actually not very good at timing a lot of the damage combinations with the Warp Throw. That being said, VP's dicking down in my favor. He managed to get a single cap, but it's not enough, and we're gonna have the game finish up. Alright, in game 0 to 54. I think we played about like 5 games today or so. And we traded games. This was definitely the closest one. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.